Hello everyone, it is now June 4th, 2021, and I am starting to get into the Q&A, and I've decided to pick some of the questions that you have asked me and devote a separate video to these questions because I think my answer to them is going to be extensive. All right, the question that I've picked for this video was asked by Rainbow Sky Gay and Proud 22 hours ago. It's the second question in that set of questions, and he asked, what do you like about philosophy? And what do you think of Steve's thoughts on philosophy? Do you agree with him or disagree with him, and why? Steve here refers to Steve Donoghue. I don't think he needs an introduction to most of the viewers of my channel. I've talked about him before. But just in case you don't know him, he is a book critic and a well-known and beloved YouTuber, booktuber, talking about books and life, different topics, mostly books. He's also very interactive, which is a feature of his YouTube channel that I enjoy. One of the features of Steve's thought is that he doesn't like philosophy, and he doesn't like psychoanalysis. He is dismissive of these disciplines, these genres of writing. I'm not sure about psychology, but I wouldn't be so surprised if he's also against psychology. So philosophy, psychoanalysis, and psychology. And the reason for him being against these genres, these styles of writing, these attitudes, I remember hearing that there are 3 cardinal sins that he counted in one of his videos. These cardinal sins, I took note here. One of them is these cardinal sins of philosophers is that they violate readability. So a philosopher takes a topic, a question, try to attempt to respond to a question, but the first thing that is sacrificed by the philosopher is readability. So the text ends up being torturous. The second sin of philosophers is that they violate common sense, which is, unlike the first one, I see that as almost a necessary feature of philosophy. And the third one is the violation of concision or brevity. A philosopher is long-winded, typically. Although that is not a unique sin to philosophy. Writers in any genre can violate the axiom, the necessity for brevity, the value of brevity. Now, of course, I sympathize with Steve's reasons, and I totally understand when somebody doesn't like philosophy, doesn't enjoy philosophy, doesn't get the point in philosophy. And what is very unique and special about Steve is that he has read a lot of philosophy. He has read a lot of philosophy, psychoanalysis, all these things that he doesn't like, he has actually done the work. So he is entitled, more than anybody else that I know, he's entitled to be against them. So if you are familiar with my position, my general attitude and style, you probably know that I would disagree with Steve's position. And the root of my disagreement with him is my general desire, my general aim to be observant of what it means to be human, observant of the human condition, not in the sense of making observations, but observance in the sense of observance of the law or observance of a norm or observance of a convention. Every genre in writing, every kind of cultural product, cultural practice, everything we have is a tradition, philosophical tradition, is regardless of its shortcomings, regardless of its craziness, its limitations, its the ways in which it is misused and misapplied and is taken as a device of oppressing or silencing a group of other people, regardless of all of those things. Every tradition, especially intellectual traditions or artistic tradition, cultural traditions, these are expressive of a part of our human nature. And philosophy, to put it very briefly, expresses our desire to acquire and cultivate good judgment, not sensation and perception, not experience, not the desire to be immersed in song and dance and sensuality, but that desire to be distant and detached in order to form judgments and form relatively good and correct ideas about things, including our sensual experiences of things like art. Now, in that sense, in that general sense, I am on the side of philosophy. My thinking about philosophy is in part informed by psychoanalysis. Freud has a short paper which is in English translated as Drives and Their Fate. And that distinction between the impulse, libidinal impulse, and the fate, what becomes of an impulse. And then Jung took that formula and replaced that general impulse. The initial impulse doesn't have to be a sexual impulse. For Jung, what was Jung's revision to the theory of libido was that these impulses could be genuinely non-sexual from the beginning. We can have a genuine epistemic impulse to know, a desire to know reality, to know other people, to know ourselves. And that, of course, does not mean that I approve every academic book that comes from a philosophy department, that a philosophy professor that I would enjoy and approve and like. The products of academic philosophy that, many of them are not even interested in rereading their own work. This is not a problem unique to philosophy. In many different academic fields, disciplines, writing has become a means of gaining points and prestige and, gaining the necessities and prerequisites of getting a promotion. This is a very unfortunate way that academia works. Many times people write their works knowing full well that what they're writing is not worth reading. And they write it regardless. People have told me in psychology, my field, they've told me that there's a lot of problems with the research we have done, but we had to publish it. So that contaminates the field, that contaminates the tradition. Many people who want to get into the field, they don't know that. They don't know the problematic reasons behind the motivations, the wrong kind of motivations behind writing. And so in that sense, it will distort the judgment of newcomers. Maybe I can add here that this expression I'm talking about, this expression that shows up as philosophy, it is an answer to something. And that thing, the desire, is legitimate. It's a genuine desire. The desire for good judgment, good thinking, correct thinking, distinguishing better ways from worse ways of thinking. That desire, the core impulse, impetus behind philosophy, that itself, I think we should acknowledge that and recognize it as a valid impulse. The outcome, the fate of that impulse, that is something that we can evaluate separately. Once we adopt that attitude in relation to philosophy, we do not glorify philosophy excessively. We will not say philosophy is the best thing, it's the king of all genres in writing. I wouldn't take up that position. So in that sense, I think when Steve goes against philosophy and philosophers, he's going against an overly inflated version of philosophy, a self-image of philosophy that is excessively overestimating itself. But that is not the only way to think about philosophy. Philosophy can be thought about in a very modest way. There was a very quiet university professor. His name is Albert G. Balz. He was a student of John Dewey. He is completely unknown. I don't know why exactly I started reading his work a few years ago. But in one of his articles, he very interestingly reformulates Descartes' the first move in Descartes' meditations, his first major move, which is I think, therefore I am. And he reformulates that in terms of a community. So for Descartes, the first stance was I think, I have thought, and that cannot be refuted. Balz reformulated, he rewrote that in terms of not I think, but what is that we cannot refute is that there is a tradition, intellectual tradition, cultural tradition of philosophers. What we can say irrefutably is that there is a community, or there are communities of inquirers. There are communities of philosophers, writers. Communities that are gathered and driven by philosophical questions. That is the first, that was his replacement for Descartes' cogito. Instead of I think, he started by saying that we think. So yeah, Albert Balz, I think there should be a young scholar somewhere to go back to his works and revive him, bring attention to his work. I have also been influenced by French thinker, philosopher François Laruelle. This is one of his works, Philosophy and Non-Philosophy. It is a difficult work, but it just requires patience because he's introducing a new style of thinking. And one of his goals is precisely to deflate philosophy's self-image, philosophy's overestimation of itself. And this attitude that philosophy has that sees itself as enough, that sees itself as sufficient. So Laruelle, one of his tasks, the initial moves is to go after, criticize, and undermine philosophy's own sense of sufficiency. Let me end this video with an excerpt from another French thinker, philosopher, Gilles Deleuze. There's a nice little book which could be taken as an introduction to Gilles Deleuze, maybe even philosophy, titled Negotiations. This is a collection of conversations. And the choice of the word negotiation is also very important. Negotiation is different from a conversation because negotiation happens between two irreconcilable positions. Let's say my position with regard to philosophy and Steve's position with regard to philosophy. They cannot be reconciled. They are disagreements and they will remain disagreements. We cannot synthesize these two positions. And only between irreconcilable positions we can have negotiation, not dialogue. So in a negotiation, we try to understand the other side's demands, the other side's understanding of a common situation and try to come up with practical solutions and actions. Anyways, here Gilles Deleuze talks about two different ways of thinking about texts. And I think recognizing one of these two ways of approaching a text, reading a text, is crucial in getting the point of philosophy. Let's find it. There are, you see, two ways of reading a book. You either see it as a box with something inside and start looking for what it signifies, and then, if you're even more perverse or depraved, you set off after signifiers. So this is a way of thinking about philosophical texts or any other kind of text that is about getting behind the text, getting to what the text signifies, and getting to commentaries and commentators. What is the meaning behind? Decoding the text. Okay, let's go back. And you treat the next book like a box contained in the first or containing it. And you annotate and interpret and question and write a book about the book and so on and on. This is like academic philosophy, professional philosophy. Or there is the other way. You see the book as a little non-signifying machine. Doesn't mean anything, doesn't refer to anything. There's nothing behind the book. It is non-signifying, but it is a machine. And the only question is, does it work? And how does it work? And does it work for you? If it doesn't work, if nothing comes through, you try another book. The second way of reading is intensive. Something comes through or it doesn't. There's nothing to explain, nothing to understand, nothing to interpret. It's like plugging into an electric circuit. So in this sense, keeping this in mind, if you go back and rewatch Steve's videos about philosophy, he tried the second way of reading. I guess it didn't work. So that's fine. He has read a lot of other things. We all find things that work for us, respond to our demand. And for me, philosophy has been significant because it responds to my own demands, my struggle and oppositions against culture, convention, the oppressive sides of convention and culture, the struggle that I have gone through against Islam, against religion. The philosophy has been a great liberating force in my thinking. The distance that it creates, the detachments that it enables. Philosophy is great. And it has worked for me, and I think it will continue to work. I hope this was a somewhat satisfactory response. Let me know if you have follow-up questions, both the original person who asked the question, Rainbow Sky and Proud, or anybody else who wants to ask me follow-up questions. More than welcome. All right, we'll continue in future videos.